Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Former FDA Director Dr. Scott Gottlieb was on Face the Nation yesterday. He had this to say about China and the World Health Organization when pressed by Margaret Brennan as to whether or not it's appropriate to talk about defunding the WHO as President Trump has, in the midst of a pandemic.
The president raised a lot of valid concerns. China was not truthful with the world at the outset of this. Had they been more truthful with the world, which would have enabled them to be more truthful with themselves, they might have actually been able to contain this entirely. And there is some growing evidence to suggest that. As late as January 20th, they were still saying that there was no human-to-human transmission, and the WHO is validating those claims on January 14th, sort of enabling the obfuscation from China. I think going forward, the WHO needs to commit to an after-action report that specifically examines what China did or didn't tell the world and how that stymied the global response to this. I also think they need to embrace Taiwan's role in the global health community and allow them to attend the World Health Assembly. Right now, they've frozen China out. The WHO has at sort of the behest of China. And that's hampered the global response because China's been a very important partner. To give you just one more anecdote, China didn't share the viral strains, and the WHO should have made them do that. Had they shared those early on, we could have developed a diagnostic test earlier, validated it earlier.
Such an important example he gives at the end about not sharing the viral strains. A diagnostic test could have been developed earlier. So you want to talk about the problems that America had with testing, and it's a legitimate topic of conversation. But, I mean, let's start at the source here with what, if you want to play the what would have happened if, what could have happened if game, then why don't you go all the way back to China rather than just limiting yourself to February and the CDC/FDA's bungling of testing in America.
And I don't know about you, but I want China to pay for what they did and what they continue to do to this country.
Well, that is the topic of a lot of op-eds and a lot of consideration right now in terms of exactly how do you do that? What are some options available? We've talked to John Yoo over at UC Berkeley. He had a piece with some suggestions, and others have as well. And I bet Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano has some suggestions. He's the vice president of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. He's also the author of books including Wiki at War and Private Sector Public Wars. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks. I really appreciate about your summary there is I think which is so important is there's so much Monday morning quarterbacking going on now, and so much of it is highly partisan. And it's done by simply not adhering to the timeline. They simply assume information that they think that they have now, that they just assume that readers will believe that the administration had in February and January, which just isn't true. I mean, you hit on the key markers there. Until you actually have the virus in hand, you can't develop an effective test. And so much of the early testing, people said, well, everybody else was testing around the world. But those testings had a high degree of false positive because they weren't good tests. And until we actually had the information and had to create that test, in addition with our own structure of putting tests together, we really couldn't roll testing out. The point about the Chinese lying about transmission, that was so crucial because that really pushed even starting an effective response into February. People had no idea. I had no idea. I was briefing my leadership at Heritage, and I kept saying, well, at least we know that, the human-to-human transmission is not easy. That's the saving grace of this disease so far, and that was simply untrue.
And so thinking about this larger question of how do we make China pay for what they did, and I don't think it's just, in one way, but some of the things under consideration, everything from defunding the WHO and delegitimizing that organization to seizing or freezing assets of Chinese nationals to putting a new layer of vetting of the scions of Chinese communist leaders who they want to send to go to college or university in this country. A lot of ideas afoot.
Yeah, I'm glad you had John Yoo on as a lawyer and talk to the legal stuff. I would say one thing we can absolutely count on is a much higher level of what's called reciprocity. So whether it's journalists or how companies are treated or visas or foreign students or anything else, we still, despite being tougher on China, have much more liberal policies towards China than China has towards us. So absolutely, whether it's sharing information with the World Health Organization or students or anything else, expect the U.S. to get much, much, much tougher on. We are going to treat you, China, like you treat us. I thought the FDA commissioner's comments on the WHO are exactly right. We have to start with demanding accountability and transparency and go from there. And we do have a pretty big sort of Damocles hanging over their heads. We are the world's largest contributor to the WHO, and the threat of the withdrawal for U.S. funding would be pretty devastating.
Well, I mean, don't you think we should do that to send a message? At least for a few years,
first of all, I think
pull out our funding of WHO?
Well, here, see, this is kind of the kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. As soon as when you disengage completely, then you lose all influence. And sometimes that's fine, like the Human Rights Council, who cares? Nobody pays attention to them anyway. But in the case of WHO, right now, we really do need transparency and accountability, even if in the end the United States decides to go off and set up its own international health organization. We need to really understand the forensics of what happened, and we have to understand how they responded to this. And so the priority right now has to getting them essentially to come clean. That's the most important thing. Otherwise, they will hide the truth forever. And that's just not about protecting China and lives, but we need to understand all the dynamics of this so we can be able, we're in better shape to respond next time.
What's the state of play in the military after that flap that involved the captain on the Roosevelt who was deposed, and then the Secretary of the Navy went after because of his intemperate comments on deck, according to reports, and Trump suggesting openly that he thought that was an inappropriate language, and so on and so forth, and not to mention, and most importantly, the number of sailors who've been infected with COVID-19. Where are we with the military chain of command, the belief that our military men and women are being properly looked after?
Yeah, this kind of reads like Hamlet, where everybody's a bad guy here. So the Secretary of the Navy was relieved, I think appropriately. He made very injudicious remarks before the crew, which were not what a professional would do. So we have a new acting Secretary of the Navy, as I think, because we have a nomination of Secretary of the Navy that's still pending. So as I understand right now, the acting Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations are kind of reviewing the whole process of what happened and making a determination of what's appropriate. So, 25 years in the military, I've always believed is that the best thing is to keep this in the chain of command, hold the chain of command responsible. And so we sure are. As far as the crew goes, I understand they're being taken care of in Guam.
And speaking of the military in a different sense, the National Guard has been scrambled in a number of states to do a number of different things. Early on, it was to provide support for the medical response in the states that saw the earliest iterations of the virus, like Washington State and California. More recently, it's been to act as, election judges in Wisconsin in last week's primary. With respect to the National Guard being called up and just sort of the military presence in civilian life, has anything you've seen concerned you particularly?
No, you have to remember the National Guard is us. I mean, these are
right.
The people that are in the National Guard are, our neighbors and our friends. And, one day they're a cop or a garbage collector, and the next day they put a uniform on the military. So they are citizen soldiers, they're part of our community. We have a long-standing tradition of deploying the U.S. military for disaster response. People think back to Katrina. You have to remember virtually every one of those deployments in National Guard are under what something is called Title 32. And that refers to the U.S., the law and U.S. code under which the authorities in which they're mobilized are. And under that title, the federal government is paying their salary, which is great because it takes the burden off state and local governments, which are trying to deal with the response. But the National Guard is responsible to the state and local governments, to the governor, and they are what they can and cannot do is really determined by what the governors say according to the law and the constitution, the constitutions of the states and their law. And typically we use the military for all kinds of things. So being poll workers to delivering mail to helping out at old age homes, all those things is appropriate use of the military. If there is things that look shady, I haven't seen anything, but I haven't checked every news event all over the country. It's really the states, the governors, and the adjutant generals that are responsible and held accountable for what they're doing.
One more question on the military, because I remember when Trump had a lot of military men in his cabinet initially, that was a sign that he was some sort of authoritarian and there was going to be a military takeover from America. Now we have this task force response team, which includes some members of the military playing key roles. But that's not good enough for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who want some military person to be designated a czar and be the point person for the coordinated response. From what you've seen from the task force, is there any reason to add another chief to the org chart?
Yeah, sure. Of course, what we need is more bureaucracy, right? That always helps.
Right.
More layers of bureaucracy always make things better. Look, that is reflective of something that I think, talked about before a lot on the show, which is much of the nature of the criticism is just partisan. We're for whatever the president is not for. Or even when we're for what the president's for, we have to say, well, he's not doing exactly the way we do. It's been highly unhelpful. I mean, and I think that's and the irony, of course, is a uniformed military person is in charge of the logistics chain. First of all, you have the people in the Uniform Health Service, which are a uniformed service in the United States, and of course, a lot of logistics are being done under Transcom and U.S. Northcom, which of course are run by generals.
He is Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. You guys be safe.
You too.
Yeah, be sane. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
This is an important coronavirus update from the nonprofit Global Healthy Living Foundation. Do you or a loved one live with a chronic illness? If so, you and your family may be at a higher risk for contracting the COVID-19 coronavirus. The Global Healthy Living Foundation has made free information and support available for your protection and well-being. Go to ghlf.org to enroll in their free patient support program to get updates and information related to the coronavirus outbreak. Protect yourself and your family. Visit ghlf.org today.
Right now, we're all stuck at home. We're all watching a lot of TV and movies, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, watching all 6 seasons of Community again, like I'm doing. But there's one movie you won't find on any of those streaming services. It's called No Safe Spaces. This is the documentary our very own Dennis Prager and Adam Carolla produced that shows how free speech is under attack in America, especially in places like college campuses, on social media platforms, and, of course, in Hollywood. Prager and Carolla explain how America is becoming a dangerous place to speak your mind and share unpopular ideas. No Safe Spaces features folks from across the political spectrum: Dave Rubin, Tim Allen, Cornel West, Jordan Peterson. This is a documentary that Hollywood has worked hard to make sure you can see, but you can. It's available now to stream on demand at nosafespaces.com. That's nosafespaces.com. Spend time watching No Safe Spaces together with your family. Watch it today at nosafespaces.com.
Right now, we cannot be overwhelmed. We have to work to keep our loved ones safe and protect our communities. We have to work to stay strong, to stay connected, to stay focused. We have to work to inspire, to innovate, to build new solutions. But for all of this to work, we have to work together. At ZipRecruiter, we connect